Okay, guys, welcome to La Autopsia. This is gonna be, this is change. Today, this is the first episode in English, so insert applauses right now, I guess. Here. That's good. That's good. Capita,
Yes. Yes,
this
it
is
is.
this is this is different, but I think this is gonna be so good that we're gonna continue doing this. So thank you for your time,
I'm
Capita.
already, I'm excited. I'm already enjoying it. So let's have a blast. Let's go for it.
Let's go for it. So, guys, today I think I have brought this and I have talked about this. I mean, we have talked about this, me and Capita, for a while now. It's been almost a year and 6 months since we started La Autopsia. And I think it's time for the English speaking audience to enjoy what we're doing. I think this is something very cool. It's like a love letter to the survival horror and horror fan base as a whole. You know, it doesn't have to be specifically for survival horror. But since I built this channel on top of that premise, you know, like this is the house of survival horror, and then we have this, we have worked with La Autopsia for a while, trying to build up a podcast where we can basically dissect anything related pop culture that ties into horror, or anything that would include like anything that from the neurodivergence. You know, it's a very broad spectrum. Anyway, welcome if you're here. If you haven't followed the channel, we encourage you to follow the channel. There's gonna be more videos like this incoming, and welcome to La Autopsia. So today we're gonna be talking. We're gonna try to break down the engine behind survival horror. There's a lot of different opinions in this, and this is just made by years and years and years of El Joe, me playing these games, and it comes from passion, you know, like it's so I think Capita shares that same passion too. But
I do.
we did when we started doing this, the idea behind it was like I was more leaning into survival horror. Capita loves psychological horror. And for most people, they don't acknowledge psychological horror as a genre. That's okay. That's your opinion. They think that psychological horror is part of survival horror, which I can understand why they do that. But we were trying to bring those two concepts and create something unique when we did La Autopsia, you know, deep diving into the lore and trying to analyze everything. Me bringing in gaming history, and then Capita bringing his expertise. Because for you, if it's your first time here, Capita, he's a psychologist. So with that said, Capita,
Yes.
let's start from the beginning. See, that even sounds good in English too. Guys, let's start this deep dive. I think today we're gonna look at what really fuels fear. And we're gonna focus at least this one in survival horror. We might touch other genres just a little bit just to make points. But we're not gonna be talking about the monsters. You know, we're gonna be talking about maybe what I call the systems. You know, what makes you sweat, what makes you feel dread, what makes you get into that like vibe when you're playing survival horror, which in my opinion is what makes it so addictive. So
Mhm.
let's start with the psychology of fear. And this is a topic that I love because we have Capita here. I'm gonna let him dig deeper into that. But it all start with that primal instinct, right? I think that is what makes horror games so effective in captivating audiences and creating communities like these games do. Fight and flight, and even I don't know if you're familiar with this, you're watching, but there's another thing that they call the freeze. It's when you freeze. And why survival horror activates these responses. So, Capita, can you explain that from a different?
Well, no, I'm just going to take a more traditional biological approach to it. You mentioned it's really interesting because the whole point of, I mean, even the gender, we call it like survival horror or like psychological horror. Because it's about surviving, you know. When it comes to evolution, fear is one of those things that helps our species survive. If we're not afraid, we're reckless. If we're reckless, we get hurt. We might not make it to reproduce and extend the survival of the species. So, fear is nothing but an evolutionary reaction to preserve the species. And in order for that to work out, there's a physiological reaction to it. Like you said, is a fight or flight or freeze response. That is a coping mechanism that we physiologically have just to be able to cope with the fear, with the threat that we have in front of us. I like to say, like, back in the caveman era, because I'm not gonna get too technical because on the top of my head I cannot think specifically the age, but caveman era, the Flintstone, you know what I'm talking about.
It's the Flintstones.
So, but bottom line is that in order for mankind to survive, the human species, we have to like experience fear, so we protect ourselves. And it's a physiological reaction. Our hearts start pounding. We have this dreadful feeling that we, like you said, if it's like the fight response to it, physiologically speaking, the heartbeat is gonna go up because you need to pump more blood because you're getting ready to fight something off, like try to fight and survive. I don't know, a predator that is like around, like lurking and trying to like hunt you, or flight, which is like just running away, just fleeing the scene, so to speak. And it's pretty much like yes, you still need to have your entire like engine, your muscles, you have to get them ready, warm up, and just so you can just run away. If for one of the examples is like birds, for example, birds, like birds usually poop when they get afraid, just because they can get lighter.
Yep.
Just to take off.
That's a fact right there.
That's a physiological reaction. But for us too, yeah, that's why like the entire like I'm gonna say trope or like cliche of like people soiling themselves, when they're like really scared, is a reason because you're trying to get rid of whatever is on your gut, so the blood that is being utilized in your gut then can go to your like limbs, your arms, your legs, so you can either take off or run. So it's definitely a physiological reaction. One of the most amazing things about, like, I'm gonna say, this marriage of like psychological horror and physiology is that we you can get to a point to desensitize, but trust me, if your brain is working properly, you shouldn't have any issues experiencing fear. Maybe not to the things that maybe you have a different version of threat that may like intimidate you, that may like get you to start like having this physiological reaction, getting nervous, want to like all the physiological symptoms that I just described. But the bottom line is that you start responding to that threat to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And when it comes to horror games, the moment you invest yourself in the main character or one of the main characters, sometimes it doesn't have to do necessarily like the player that you like, the character that you are using in the game. So they can be the story. Once you identify with that character and something happens to the character, you have an emotional attachment to them, so you're gonna have a physiological reaction.
Yeah.
It could be sadness, it could be fear, you could be afraid of them. And also like if when they chase you, you're the main character. Like I always think about the Alien games.
Oh yeah.
Like they're like I'm always, they're chasing you, so of course you're gonna have this dreadful sensation of like something bad is going to happen, I'm going to die, blah blah blah. And if you're really invested in the game, you're going to experience a similar response that you will do if this was happening in real life. So it's a very interesting concept, and like I said, it's just an evolutionary response, so we can all protect ourselves and the species.
I think there's a very undeniable connection with what you just described that happens naturally and biologically in our bodies. To your mind, put yourself in that situation when you're watching something. It's like, I don't know if you feel it like this, but at least for me, when I was watching horror movies as a kid, I'm playing a survival horror game. For an instance, you forget that you're using Chris Redfield, or for an instance, you forget you're using Jill Valentine, and you identify it. Like, you don't say, "Oh, Jill got, she got killed." No, it's like, "Oh, it killed me," When you lose and stuff, and even the game, you are dead.
When you're dead, exactly. It doesn't say like Jill died.
Yeah.
No, you are dead.
So it's the same with Metal Gear Solid. That scream Snake, it make you feel like, oh, it's over. So there's this undeniable
GTA.
connection. GTA too, yeah, wasted.
Yes, yeah.
And there's this learned something that is not defined, but it's not being able to respond to an emergency like this. It creates real anxiety. And the whole thing about survival horror, psychological horror, because they used different approaches, both of them. And we're going to get to that soon. But that sensory part, the manipulation of sound, visuals, and minimal UI, they create tension. It's just like, I don't know, let's use examples. Let's talk about one of the most easiest one that I can use to describe this is Outlast. Outlast is a game that if you're invested in it and you're playing it, I was one of those guys that I quitted the game at some point because I even said it. I think I streamed it once and I quit it. I said to the guy, guys, I need a break. Like my chest is tight and there's something that I want to mention right there because Capita mentioned something very important. It's like when your brain is functioning correctly, you should be able to experience fear. I think that's why people get when they're going to a panic attack. You get this flight and fight out of the blue without a logical explanation because something is not working right.
I'm freeze too. Some people get like this, like it's not the same, but catatonic like state where they don't do anything. Yeah. They just get like flow. They don't move. They don't respond to the stimuli. But that's also a physiological response. And by the way, I didn't mention why that exists, but that one exists because there were some predators back in like the caveman era.
Yeah.
That they couldn't see. They're like more like colorblind, so we got blended. So if you didn't move, they couldn't see you.
Yeah,
I believe that one of the one or maybe some of the Jurassic Park movies they make reference to that. Some of the dinosaurs, the predators, they're not able to see you unless you move. That's why they stay stagnant.
Yeah.
So they cannot perceive you.
Yeah, we've talked about how you can trigger these responses with different things. We talked about manipulation of that sensory part through sound, visuals, and I would never forget the first time that I heard the classic zombie sound. It was, for us right now, it's so simple, right? But it was very
normalized.
The Resident Evil one, the OG sound of the zombie. At that point, you knew somebody was playing Resident Evil. And until this day, if you hear it someplace else, you'll know that was Resident Evil. And there was something so simple about that sound, and it was that it was followed by silence. And it was horrible. And then you have the sounds of the city and the doors creaking and open. So maybe you don't realize it, because I've read a lot on the internet about how I read something the other day about they building something like a tool or something to measure how they were going to classify these games. And they're putting Resident Evil almost in the middle of the tool. It's like a graph. And I'm like, why you put it in there? Because survival horror, like the measuring stick should be Resident Evil, because that's the thing where it all started, right? But there's a ramification of I would call it like the school of people that follow this genre, that believe that if you don't have weapons and you flee, and you're like the damsel in distress that we're familiar with, that's the true survival horror. And it's weird for me, because at least survival horror, if I can defend myself, I must have a way to defend. There must be a little bit of action in there, but it has to be limited, because you have to feel like you're losing control in order for the survival horror thing to be there. At least for me, that's my point of view.
But do you think that, like, when they were like creating that criteria and making that, I don't know, sounds like a chart.
Yeah.
were they making reference to like the franchise or this or a specific game? Because the problem with Resident Evil, and we've talked about this on the Spanish like podcast like several times, it's like it evolved
Oh yeah.
like the to the point that I can make an argument that they also like forced the genre to evolve with with them. So
Yep.
I guess what I'm trying to what I'm asking is, so they were referring to one game or entire franchise? Because entire franchise, you can make a strong argument that it does play with the spectrum of horror.
So we have mentioned, like, I think we started talking about the term spectrum on the first Autopsia. We mentioned that. Like, this is where we start. This is like, and you have precursors. And I just released a video today about it. Do you have precursors? Like, I don't know. You have Sweet Home in there. You have precursors for the for Nemesis and Mr. X. You have them from the Friday the 13th NES game. And there's many people that they want to debate that. That's okay. I get it, because you have other pursuers like the Clock Tower one, and it was a click and point. And there's a bunch we can dig deep into that. But the thing is, survival horror as a genre, the first time that it was used, it was with the release of Resident Evil, 1996. And they were well-defined hallmarks, but then, as Capita mentioned, that created the starting point for it, right? And like everything that it's great, I don't know, maybe music, you tell me, music, movies, movie franchises, there's a lot of stuff that combines to influence the creators of that first thing. But the moment the moment that thing got created forward, it has a name, right? That's what happened with Resident Evil. So you have that, and then the game started evolving, Resident Evil. Because I mentioned before, and we have talked about it a lot of times, like how what's happening in history around the developers. It doesn't matter if it's in Japan, in the United States, or whatever the games are made. In this case, it was in Japan. It's influencing, like, socio-political, everything that's happening.
It's very contextual to the time, yes.
And we have seen that evolve, from the three first games that were like one, they were very close to the releases, one from each other. And then you have that boom that went, I don't know where, because it came and it was good. Resident Evil 4, it evolved the series, but it was completely, the formula was changed completely, right? And it evolved. That tool, and it's not the only tool I've seen. I've seen previous people trying to display how this works, and either I'm putting pictures in order with numbers, but they always start with, the first the first survival horror game is Alone in the Dark, but before that was Clock Tower. I have an issue with it, because for me, Clock Tower, even though that it falls in that survival horror spectrum, maybe it's still a precursor, because there's a lot of things in there that we're missing. It's a point and click. The feeling of dread was there, but it was because of the pursuer, man. You have Scissorman, following you around the whole game, which is, I'm not saying it's a bad game. It's a great game. It was actually genius when the time it came out. And then Alone in the Dark introduces that core mechanics of the tank controls, right? And that 3D thing. Then Resident Evil comes in. But Resident Evil was based on Sweet Home, that was based on a movie that was successful in Japan. So when it all comes to play, when you're using these tools, I think that the right thing to do would be start off with what generated the discussion. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but start from there.
It kind of makes sense, but if I may, like, I believe that also one of the problems that if you're going to put, like, I think I may speculate on why they chose to put Resident Evil in the middle, so to speak. Yeah. Because I find like this is like a recipe, a pie recipe, if you will. And they're like, what is a pie? A pie, it has a crust, blah blah blah, and it has like these ingredients. But is it a chicken pie? Is it a cherry pie? Is it a pizza pie? I can keep like on and on and on, like different. So what they think, it has this very, like, I'm going to say this, the basic structure, the skeleton, if you will. And they're going to start like adding a little bit more of this, but then this one just has just a teeny bit of this. It has it, but it is it's not gonna be highlighted like with different. I'm gonna say subgenre for lack of better phrasing, and then you keep playing with it. So you can go to the extreme of like you have no weapons, you have to survive as it is, you have to run, hide, and we have games like that are like
Oh yeah,
have been pretty successful.
great games.
Or you have the extreme when you end up like being OP and then having bazookas and everything.
Unlimited ammo. Yeah.
So I feel like it changes like the developers tend to like change a little bit the perspective on like, oh, I wanted to focus a little bit on this aspect.
Yeah.
Or I wanna have a heck of a narrative. I'm gonna focus more on that than say like the play mechanics. I mean, we've seen that often to the point that for fair or not, we keep like criticizing and judging games because the developers chose to focus maybe a little bit too much on this and they neglected other parts. But it's the recipe. And a pie is a pie is a pie.
That's what okay, so I get it. And I think that's where it gets a little bit tricky for me. Because if the recipe has ingredients, and I think it cannot be denied that action was always an ingredient. It was limited,
sure,
but it was there. Then I've seen people talk about maybe The Evil Within not being a survival horror game. I have an issue with The Evil Within not being included as survival horror game. I can get the action part, I understand. But there are other things that come into play. And we have said a lot of stuff, like we lost the tank controls for a while there. They're coming back. They're making a comeback, right? But I don't know how controlling progression raises the stakes in these games and how you can. Let's take another one, for example. I think the perfect example to define what that transition went well, we can talk about Alien Isolation. That's a great game. Yeah. It is a great game. And even though it has some action in it, and it feels, at some point, it feels like, that, it still hit that spot of survival horror. Like, I feel like that's a true survival horror game. And it's one of those games that I think everybody agrees on that. I think the issue comes when you have other games like maybe Resident Evil 4 not being classified as survival horror game. But, to start with, that game was created by Shinji Mikami. And in my opinion, when we talk about the spectrum, you have the starting point that we're mentioning, and you have the other ones. Like, you can even take it all the way to Resident Evil 4, The Evil Within, I don't know, Dead Space 2. There's a lot of games out there that are like, that they lean heavy into action, right? And then you have, I would put like Resident Evil 1 there in the start, and then I would go in and start adding other stuff. But I can get why people put maybe, the formula is there. This is Clock Tower 3. The formula is there. This is Haunting Ground. It feels like it comes from the roots, even though Fiona didn't grab a gun and start shooting nobody. You know what I mean? But it's there. It feels like that. But in this game, my survival skills require more of hiding and running, and I really surviving, but I don't have a gun. So I can get why people can put that, okay, maybe Resident Evil goes in the middle and this goes to the start, And
I was gonna make reference to like Five Nights at Freddy's.
Oh.
So it's to me that goes into like the extreme opposite of games like Resident Evil 4, or like heavy action oriented games. It's like it's too. That's the opposite. That's like, you have to make it through the night. I think you have to You have to literally survive. Forget about like the threats and everything else. I mean, to beat them. No, you beat them if you figure out how to survive.
In those games, you need to spot the anomalies. You need to, evade. There's a lot of stuff happening in there. But I think that
that's sort of the puzzle too.
Yeah, the community is moving towards those games more into. I think they're calling them Those are like jump scare horror games. But at the same time, there's an element of solving puzzles in there. I wouldn't call them survival horror, but there's something in there, and it's definitely influenced by the puzzles and the tension and everything. It's like I mentioned in the video that I released today. There's some stuff, and when I say stuff, I mean games, that when you play, and I mentioned Alan Wake, right?
Yes.
There's a misconception that Alan Wake may be a survival horror game. I think it's not. It's a action, it's cinematic, but it has the psychological toll that game takes on you when you're playing. It's so good that it feels like it derivates from that original formula, right? So in my mind, when I was playing it the first time, I thought this is a survival horror game. But then you're shooting, you're pointing with the light, you're doing this. There's so much stuff happening that the progression of the game is totally different from that slow pace that you need to think about stuff, solve puzzles. You take your time here, inventory management. No. And I can get why people felt like Resident Evil 4 completely changed the formula, because now you're shooting stuff and your enemies are dropping ammo, right? And there's this unbalance on opinions, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what this is. This is our opinion, and there's a lot of people out there putting their opinions, right? Like, for example, I saw a comment that I haven't realized it until I read the comment. I'm one of the guys that I love games like Signalis and Crowd Country that always come up when you talk about survival horror indie games, and Alisa, that for me is the perfection on that spot. But Crowd Country, when you're playing as Mara, as long as you go back to the car, there's always bullets there. And somebody said, well, that beats the survival horror feeling. And I said, no, it doesn't. Because what about all the people, including me, that didn't figure that out? So are you telling me then that the original Resident Evil is not going to be survival horror because you unlock the infinite magnum? There's stuff that are put into games that are meant to be solved as a puzzle. It's...
Well, but just for the sake of playing devil's advocate here.
Yep.
There's a keyword there. You unlock it.
Yeah, puzzles.
So it's a reward that you get. You may not get it as part of the game progression, and if that's the case, I can make an argument. No, you still have you still like resources. It's just like the game rewards you for an accomplishment, and that's the price.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's what it is, but I can justify from that angle.
Hey, Capita, I just played Fear the Dark Unknown. It's too effing difficult. It's one of those that made me remind the first time that I played Resident Evil Remake, which is Unforgiven, right? And
relentless.
But I discovered almost a mid-game that if you go to a sofa that is on the second floor and you sit on the sofa, you wake up on your room on like outside of that nightmare, and you can go and save. After I died like I don't know how many times, and then I didn't say anything. I'm watching a guy playing live, and he's getting killed, and he's like, "This is my 4th stream, and I haven't passed this because there's a zombie there that every time I go that corner he kills me." Bro, I couldn't. Like, I was gonna write, just go to the sofa and save. But I said, I'm not going to damage the experience for him. Let him figure it out. Yes. And I shit you not, 5 minutes after I decided not to tell, like, everyone in the comment section started writing, like, go to the sofa. And he's like, what sofa? What are you talking about? And I'm like, didn't you already use the sofa when you started? So it didn't, if you're playing backtracking 101, like how we call it, it's always a good spot to go back where the game began, right? But it doesn't come to mind, and I think this is one of the great things about this type of games.
But again, I can make that argument that is sort of like a reward that you have to figure it out. They don't tell you, but if you learn about it by like however you choose to play the game, then you get to have that reward, and then things become easier for you. And just for kicks, I can still like double down on the whole thing of you earning it. Is that just like every other game. You if you do something really great, you can. Let's talk about Final Fantasy. If you do these like ridiculously long, extensive requests, you might end up like gaining a summon of like this like
Yeah.
I don't know, one hit kill deity that will like destroy everything, but you have to pay for it. I mean, and the payment is like how. I mean, a lot of grinding, a lot of side quests, an entire protocol for you to actually to get to that point. So that's what is so debatable whether or not those kind of like happenings in between the I mean in the game itself that it does it take away the criteria for survival horror? Maybe
Maybe.
not, because
Maybe.
it's not a given, because it's not, you have to earn it. So
I have a very remind me if I don't, because I we talk about so much stuff when we do these videos. I don't want that to escape at the end, because I have a very very unique approach on how to define for Joe, how to define what game I feel like it's a survival horror game, and it has helped me a lot. All this like all the fog out there, because there's a lot of people talking at the same time. There's like you can find opinions that you identify, even though you didn't agree with them. You read them and you're like, oh, that makes sense. But there are others that you're reading it and there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of people just shouting opinions other people's throats and like belittling like every other thing. And I think that's not what the games are meant to be. So at the end, I promise you guys, I'm gonna give you something good. Let's move to the core of the mechanics that drive terror in this type of games. And I would like to start with limited resources, because I think that it is a strategic stress that induces panic. It's something that is so well crafted. There was a discussion a couple months ago on something that I was reading on how they did what they could with what they had at that moment when they're developing these games. And for example, fixed camera angles and the HUD, maybe the design, no map, no compass, disorientation. But then these games introduced that. They put the map in there. But then that's a Metroidvania map. So it requires skill. I remember when I first started to understand the map of Resident Evil, I was going nuts. I was looking at that lines and you're here. And then after a while looking at it, you're like, because right now people think like, oh yeah, that's easy. You just open the map and whatever's blinking, you're there. How long it may be some people to figure it out when it's blinking, it means that you're in that room. It's different, And I wanna jump back to that fixed camera angles, because nowadays we have survival horror games that are in first person view. And they are great games like Alien Isolation that we mentioned already. Resident Evil 7, for example. Resident Evil 8. I love the third person DLC. I think it was good that they did that. But in those core mechanics, not only the point of view, maybe the save points, and that some of these games, not all of them, but they introduce that permadeath. Maybe in a way that it was slightly put there. For example, let's say that you saved the game with no bullets, and you accidentally saved the game with no bullets on top of your previous save, that's a permadeath right there. To start from the beginning. And it is important how controlling that progression and raising the stakes. And then you have stuff like enemy AI unpredictability, like again, Alien Isolation, but Nemesis on Resident Evil 3, right? After a while you can learn what he's gonna do, and if you were like me, kind of slow, and you discover that Jill had a dodge button very late in the game, you were gonna have a very very fucking hard time playing that game. Another thing that it's been a topic of discussion for a while is the control schemes, like how tank controls was used as a fear mechanic, and then you found out that tank controls and fixed cameras were a thing because that's what they could work with in the platform that they were building the game. So some of these things that we know now as hallmarks of survival horror were some happy and successful accidents, right? Like the fog in Silent Hill covering the rooms without a roof, and the end of the roads that were incomplete maps. There's some beauty in it. Capita, I will ask you from a psychological perspective, and this is something that I don't think that maybe I have asked when we have recorded stuff in Spanish, but is there anything behind those controls that could maybe induce some dopamine in you and you like become so drawn into it that you don't want to play anything else? Like, for example, that it's behind me, like, because there's a lot of people like this, like we love this genre and we don't like, we're fixed to it because it's like something that it makes me freaking happy. It doesn't matter if Nemesis is beating my ass when I'm playing, I'm happy. I'm a happy place.
I mean, I don't want to get to like too deep or technical because even though I am a psychologist, my role here is not to like be a psychologist. I'm just like a fan.
Yeah.
Just talking with like a friend about video games and whatnot. So I'm just gonna like touch a little bit of the maybe a deeper psychological aspect, but I'm not gonna dig in too much. From my perspective, even the concept of tank controllers, regardless of why they came to be in the beginning, now it becomes part of the challenge.
Yeah.
You like the restriction of like your mobility and even the response time when you're like hitting the buttons. Those are, especially when you're playing like fighting games, that's a big deal. Like the opening the windows or whatnot, and then like those timing things, they become like, they are significant, but when it comes to fighting games, they take it to the end. But anyway, but it becomes very limited how you how mobile you are and the responsive time you have with survival like horror games. And it's about sometimes spacing, even if you're trying to like get a little bit of the timing of, say, a boss fight, and we start learning the patterns or what have you. Especially like if you're fighting, say, I don't know, going back to Resident Evil, a leaker, you learn the patterns of how they attack and what have you. The distance, even like how far away you are, can they get me? Like I have to get closer. I mean, so the mechanics of like the game controls, the gamepad, like it is part of the challenge, and because you're not able to move spontaneously.
Yep.
Like easy movement. It becomes a challenge. It becomes also a threat because you're trying to control a lot of things happening at once. Just trying to figure it out how to survive, which is like the key element here. So if I limit your ability to cope with the threat, that on itself becomes a stressor. So that psychological factor also plays into how you're gonna like address the threat that is in front of you.
Yep.
And so it's about like calculating. Okay, so I know. Oh, if I could just run away, like, yeah, but it's not that easy because it moves like this, and I know there's like something in the room because even though the camera is fixed, but I don't see it because the camera is fixed, so it's on the other side of the room, and I know it's making a noise that makes me aware that it's right there. So there's a lot of things that are placed in a very brilliant way, I have to say, to take your sense of control away. And we all know that if you lose that sense of control, that's when anxiety kicks in.
Yep.
Because you're trying to control the environment, you're trying to control the situation when it comes to the video game. So hence you end up finding yourself like overwhelmed by all these like stimuli around you, especially when you Silent Hill, for example. The beauty of the first Silent Hill, the radio, the sound. I love that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I
as white noise is just
sometimes
perfect.
I went into a room and the white noise and the radio like went off, and I was just looking around. Well, what the heck? I don't see anything. Like what am I supposed to do here? Like and it's going off like crazy, and I don't see anything. I mean, these are mind tricks that are really, really effective. So going back to your question, yeah, definitely the amount of limitations they provide you. I mean, they hold you down to comes to the gameplay and the mechanics of the buttons and controls and whatnot. It definitely plays a big factor on your reaction. Now, unfortunately, there is a neurochemical reaction exchange even when you feel threatened, and there's a little bit of I'm going to say anguish because it's not necessarily pain, and you have that dreadful sensation, and then you overcome it. Also, there's a release of endorphins, and it's a chemical shift from, oh, I'm relieved that I was able to like make it, but it was stressful, and that chemical um, polarization, if you will, it leads to you like getting addicted to it because there's the adrenaline rush. There's like endorphins that kick in once you overcome whatever's going on. So it definitely can lead to. I'm very careful with the word like addiction because they're when it comes to psychologists, they're on the fence. Like, just to give you an example
you feel pleasure.
Point. Like, yes, because of the relief of the accomplishment. But I was gonna make reference to, like what some people call the, because I don't want to disband the sex addiction.
Yeah.
That it's. I remember when I was in school and still like I think it's up for debate still. Is it an addiction or just a compulsion? And you know,
I see what you're. Yeah.
Popularly speaking, people say, "Oh, it's an addiction." Depending how you define addiction, because I mean, do you have withdrawal effects? If the answer is, withdrawal symptoms. If the answer is no, is it really? So, and I'm not saying it's one thing or the other. I'm just saying like there's a reason why it is up for debate. So going back to maybe try to extrapolate that example to the video game aspect. I can definitely see how you get used to or dependent or needing, if you will, for just to avoid the addictive part of it. That you want to keep like replicating, recreating that sensation of like I feel threatened, and then I get that relief, and that's why like good horror movies can be so popular, can be make so much money because we want to feel something. Sometimes we want to feel something happy. Sometimes we want to feel something, like sad. Sometimes we want to feel something that scares us. We want to be exposed to that emotion that, because of the society we live in nowadays, we don't get to feel that often.
And it's so good that I like the flow, how things are going as we're discussing this. Because one of the things that I have in the Joe cards, because I have them right here. I have
yes.
Yeah, I need this shit. I just need it. But
I like Carded Joe, I call him.
Yeah.
Carded
Joe. There's something
Carded Joe.
There's something with the engine that it's being used to develop the game. And I want to touch this because I've been talking a lot with game devs. And they, there's a lot of tools out there, right? Let's mention two of them, like, for example, Unity or Unreal. And how the engine affects the lighting, the sound occlusion, the real-time shadows, the latency on the input delay on the controllers. When does it add fear versus when it adds frustration to players? And I think there's a very, very fine line in there where sometimes that delay can add to the experience. And we have seen that with a lot of indie games that I've played on the channel. I just wanted to mention that because I feel like when people are being judgmental about maybe let me review this game, I feel like reviews nowadays are lacking that component where they're actually putting themselves sometimes in the dev and the tools that it was using, which when it's a great part of it because we've been talking about how back in the day these devs they did what they did with Resident Evil and Silent Hill, and they did these great games with it, but we have better tools nowadays, right? But not all the tools generate the same product. All of them have limitations. All of them have the pros and cons. So I think that's something that, to take, for me, it's very important. That's all. One of the things, I don't know if you have noticed that when I do my shorts from the Te Lo Dijo El Joe, That's one of the things that I mention always in what engine the games is running. Because for me, when I'm doing my research, that's important because it gives me more or less a sense on what to expect, on how the game's gonna look, maybe based on the aesthetic that the game dev or the game designer is using. So,
Well, Joe, if I may, because I want to piggyback on that idea, and I think it's very important, just to be fair, because I feel like I often falls in the category of like misjudging a game without taking several things into consideration, like and context. To me, context, time, resources, all those things should matter.
Yeah.
But then again, I learned all those things by my interaction with you, and then, like all of the educational, because it helps me like have a wider perspective on how to analyze and whatever I end up making of this video game. So one of the things that I maybe this is the problem, just to be fair with like both sides of the equation, is like if you're a developer and you establish, okay, part of the style of the game, or maybe just because of resources, but I'm going to try to maximize them. Is that I'm going to be utilizing this specific engine, and this is what I'm going to be to establish everything. I think, in a way, it's the responsibility for the developer to then do a good job establishing the rules of the game, so to speak. Like, this is self-contained. These are your limitations. These are your abilities, your capabilities. So you can do this, you can't do that, blah, 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 blah. And then if they actually do that properly, hopefully the player is able to understand
the game,
the mechanics and the dynamics, of the game that are being established from the get-go when it comes like the game progression. So when later on things start becoming more challenging, I'm not gonna blame how crappy this looks or like how limited the mechanics, or like
it just messes up the whole experience. Yeah,
exactly. But you have to be aware of like, oh, this has already been established. But if the developer somehow fails to communicate, like, hey, this is how the game should look like, these are the rules, so to speak, this is like the terms of how you're going to be interacting with it, then, I mean, that's on them. So it's about how it's presented, and how fair the gamer ends up like judging it.
I'm there with you, and I think nowadays most of the at least indie game devs are doing a great job on putting out there what the game history is going to be, or what the game is going to look like the game design. And they're pretty... At first, I thought that me as a game dev would get angry if somebody called my game a Resident Evil clone, or this is Silent Hill inspired, but no, they want, some of them like that. They want that because they have their influences super clear, and they just dropped it out there. And I'm playing Heartworm as we speak, and I'm in love on how good they did the explanation of the controllers. Since the beginning, they just stopped the game, and there's a huge screen telling you, this is what you're gonna do when this shows up, blah, 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 blah. That didn't take anything away from me figuring out puzzles. It didn't take anything away from me trying to, being a corner bandit, like being on every corner, hoarding, trying to find stuff. The game, it didn't take anything away from the experience of the game. The old games did it on notes, or on a file that you find that you needed to read it, right? So I think it's all part of the design, and when it's done right, that horror engine can be enjoyed from a better perspective, because now you're like, okay, now I know what I need to do. Let me enjoy the game. And that part leaves us, and it takes us to, for me, and this is El Joe, this is my view. I know that for a lot of survival horror fans, the most important part is the mechanics, the game mechanics. It's good. I can play games, and this is one of the things that we talked recently, and it was off screen. I think it was on Discord. We were talking about how good the mechanics of a game can be to draw you in, even though how many years have passed. It's like, it'd be like 30-year anniversary or something like that, and we still going back to play and shoot the dogs, and you know where the dogs are coming out. You know where the zombies coming out, but you still play it, and you find it amusing because the mechanics were good, and they were not only good. At the time that they came out, there was nothing like it. So they just hit the spot, right? So, I don't know. There's something with narrative. You need to give me a good narrative with these games. And I've 100%. Seen people I've seen people debate that using the fact like, well, Resident Evil 1 didn't have like, well, to begin with, Resident Evil 1 introduced the cinematic use of like, movie clips on a game for the first time. And the story on Resident Evil was more like movie like. It was something that you could relate as sitting down and watching a movie. So the environment and the storytelling through the environment, like the bloodstained notes, the ruined walls, the tapestry being like this and that, the eerie sounds. And there was fragmented timelines in games like Silent Hill, for example. And the narration of the game was through notes scattered through the map. Some of them had cinematic scenes, some of them didn't. Some of them just had dialogues with the same game graphics, which I think are the best ones ever, because you're like really paying attention to what's happening in the game. And then
you're gonna have to.
Yeah, the narrative as a horror engine brings us to the debate of psychological horror versus survival horror. And you can throw in that mix if you're a fan of maybe the golden era, how we called it here in La Bóveda, to the PS2 era, and you can throw in Fatal Frame in there too. And now you have supernatural horror, psychological horror, and maybe survival horror, even though, it's something that I always, for me, they're all in the same package. Because of these words: trauma, memory, and guilt. So how narrative fuels fear from within, that's psychological horror in my mind. Survival horror is You're running from something, you're hiding, you need to survive, so you have bullets. And even though you have something to defend yourself, that it's the difference in between this damsel in distress games like Clock Tower, Hunting Ground, and even Rule of Rose. And I mentioned that you have a gun in Rule of Rose, but how many bullets do you have on it? And you don't need that gun through the whole game. It's different. But in Resident Evil, you're counting bullets. And as you get good in the game, you can restart that game. Hey, are you aware of how many bullets do they give you? I think that these games are like, they give you a lot of bullets. It's just the sensation the first time you played it that you feel like, oh, I'm not getting enough bullets, because you're wasting them because you don't know where you're going and you're not doing the things in the right order either. So there's a balance that for me needs to be met between that limited action, all that dread and everything, plus the puzzles, plus, tank controls, they don't need to be there necessarily, because now we have survival horror games like we mentioned in first person. But all of those things, you can also have survival horror without a map. I am a firm believer that that's doable.
It is doable, but it's a pain.
It's a pain in the ass. So
specifically, if you have to do the Metroidvania, like going back and forth,
it's a pain. It's a pain.
I'm too.
Shout out to Casper Cross, bro. It's genius. But then there's also an element, as we were mentioned before, that spectrum of survival horror evolving. And now you're adding that psychological horror perspective into survival horror, and you're creating games that they look different. And this is where the fan base start getting divided. And this is when you have people calling things, what was the term the other day? Action horror or sci-fi horror, and they're using it to describe a game that is survival horror that within the spectrum that I believe exists is moving more or leaning more towards that action side, right? And we can mention, I think one of the most notable ones, aside from, the conversation that it's open out there about the evil within, it's Dead Space. Because you have Dead Space 1 that it was 100% survival horror. There's no denying that. But then you have 2 and 3 that you're like, okay, this is different, but still the story, so I'm going to play it, and I enjoyed them. 3, not that much, but it's like Silent Hill. When you get to 4 and you're like, ugh. But I love it. I love the game. I enjoyed Silent Hill. The story was so good that Joe ignored everything else.
Well, Joe, if I may, there's something I think that you kind of touched on it a little bit, but went on with other also important points, and it's about the narratives. Always have to come down to the story, and this is why I believe often like the fans get divided. I think it's mostly because of the story. My take on the whole thing, my opinion, is that you have to connect with the characters.
Yeah.
And that's why often the minimalistic approach, like the intimate stories, are way more powerful than this grandiose I'm fighting against the hell and the seven kings of hell and
Yeah.
no. I mean, Craig, like say, like this is a little girl that has been traumatized and is trying to like overcome these traumas that are manifested as blah 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 blah. See, it's more relatable because we all have experienced some sort of trauma. Maybe not to the point to have something like PTSD, but at least something enough that will shape our upbringing, how we see the world, and I will like fuel our fears, insecurities, and what have you. And if you like universal subjects, themes that we can all like relate to, like say love for the family, like even something as silly and simple as the fear of the dark, because that's an evolutionary fear. There's a reason for that.
The eternal night.
So we exactly. So,
yeah.
Exactly. So we can all like, if it's something that is universally connected and it's narrated properly, then I'm gonna invest on the character, and then it's gonna move me. I think that sometimes the problem is that if the writers focus a little bit too much on a very specific subject, maybe that's how you end up like splitting the audience. I mean, you're gonna have a lot of like fans that are like, oh, I really like it because I can relate to that, but maybe I don't know anything about what was going on there. Like one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned, not really that much because I really trust the team. It's like Silent Hill F. I want to be able to hopefully connect with the main characters, but so far what I'm noticing is like it's pretty foreign from what I know as a 40. I mean, next week I'm gonna be 45. A 45-year-old like Puerto Rican man living in Colorado. That's very specific. So I don't know how I'm gonna be able to like relate or connect to I don't know, I'm gonna say she's like 13, 14-year-old Japanese girl in the 60s. So I mean, I trust them, but I'm trying to provide this as an example of like how you can potentially isolate certain the fan base because I don't get to connect. It doesn't matter how good the game is. The mechanics the game can be really fun. But I believe that even if everything else is right, it's the difference between a really good game and something that is epic, that it marks the life of those of us who really love this.
And this that you mentioned is super important because for me, what gets me a little bit worried about Silent Hill F is the combat. And I said you can give me a good story and I don't care about the mechanics, but there's something in there that everything that I've watched and everything, and I usually don't do this. I do videos telling people to wait. Just wait, play the game, and then and then start criticizing. But I saw something that came out a couple days ago, and I don't know why I feel like this is gonna be very, very similar to a Souls game. And it I don't know, it's different, and then they confirm it. I think I read something that young fans lean more to a challenge, and now I'm starting to get worried. But we'll see how this turns out. I think, like you said,
I have a full-time job. I cannot spend that amount of time learning the patterns.
Bro, we'll see what happens. I guess I'm just with that one. I'm just gonna wait for it. I think, it's not the same team. It's not Bloober Team doing it. It's a different team. I know what I can expect from Resident Evil 1 Remake because we already saw that Silent Hill 2 Remake was good.
Yes.
So I don't know what to tell you on that one. But just to keep on going where I want to go with this, I save one of the best things for last because I think that it's often overlooked. And I want to give a shout out to two good composers that I know. Third Echo Sounds and Benny Rose. Because we're going to be talking about audio design. And you know, there's we can talk about the diversity on how sound design it's made on maybe Resident Evil OG versus Silent Hill. I think Silent Hill does an incredible job with sound design. It's a genius design, simple stuff, because less is more in this case. And you know, I was talking the other day on how Silent Hill 2 Remake did an incredible job making sure that through the noise you understand that the presence of your guilt is always there, meaning Pyramid Head. You can be walking outside in the street and you still hear the chains and you still hear metal against metal, and you can hear the sword, grinding against the floor, and all industrial sounds and every sound that makes Silent Hill, it's a hallmark of the franchise. You can hear it in the game by just be standing outside in the street, which is great. But if you kind of think about this, and I want everybody to really think about this, Resident Evil sound design used something that Silent Hill leaned on, and it's the silence as a terror train. When you in Resident Evil that if you open a door and everything's silent, you hear the door creaking, and then that room doesn't have a sound, you're waiting for something to pop out of it, and that triggers that anxiety, and you're like expecting something. Silent Hill turns off the sound, but you have 10 doors, and we've talked about this a million times, and you open the 10 doors and just one of the doors had an enemy. And then super high-pitched sounds that go very well with imperfect horror are very notable in Silent Hill, versus that silence being interrupted abruptly by very high-pitched sounds like in Resident Evil, and then when the threat goes away, it's back to silence again. So it's playing a lot with that. I think the audio design plays a very, very, very good part and chunk on all of this. And definitely you cannot have a survival horror game without stress-inducing sounds. And I'm going to point out how good this influence was on everything that was built after it. Not only on survival horror, because you can have games that, like we said, where you feel like they come from that root because of the topic they touch, but the sound design on Alan Wake is out of this freaking world. And the same way with Hellblade, with Senua Saga. That game, the audio design on Hellblade is just perfect.
I'm so glad you touched on that, because I was gonna explode. To me, it's an accomplishment. Like what they were able to do with Senua, and I remember because somehow, and I don't even remember why, I was like listening to you playing the game with these headphones on, and I was like, holy, and I was listening to the same thing that you were listening, like, holy like it is so immersive, and I don't know, whoever the consultant was for them, spot on. Like, it seems like it's so freaking good that you buy into the idea of the psychosis. It's so well, like that's what I call it. Like, it's an achievement. It's too good.
There's an indie game that he did a pretty good job on it too. It's called Final Fall. It's the topics touched and how it was displayed. I interviewed the guy a couple weeks back, and he was explaining that he actually got help from people that he knows are actually schizophrenic, and and he's like, hey, I don't want to trigger anything, but I need help. And they said, this is exactly what happens to me. And
you can tell it's too good.
It's just one of those things. Capita, I want to do something different for La Autopsia now that we're making this transition to the English speaking audience, and I want to encourage our current followers, because we discussed this with them before starting the switch. And last night I was on stream, and there was a very, very there was a big audience last night, and we're talking about this, and they were like, yeah, go ahead. I already consume content in English, whatever. So I asked them, like, give me questions that you want us to answer in La Autopsia. And that's something I want to start doing. So if you guys are watching, leave your questions in the comments, so on the next episode we can answer them. And I have,
down
you
there
know,
in the comment section.
this question is for Joe. It says, do you have any games that are not survival horror, but you have them in that group personally? That's a pretty good fucking question. Yes. Yes, I do. Alan Wake. Alan Wake. It's very... I even have them here, like, laid out, just Silent Hill on one side, all the collectibles from Silent Hill, and on the side, there's everything from Alan Wake. Because I relate more Alan Wake to Silent Hill that to Resident Evil, because I think Alan Wake is more like influenced by psychological horror. But
I am with you.
But the action part,
one of my favorite games.
Oh, you know what?
Yes.
You know what, Carlos? You just triggered something super interesting that I just noticed right now looking at that. Let's put it like this.
Yes.
Resident Evil 4, for the Resident Evil franchise, it can be, obviously Alan Wake is not part of the Silent Hill franchise, but just bear with me. That introduction of action that turned that psychological horror now into an action thriller. Psychological action thriller, that's how they call it. You can see that transition from the psychological horror heaviness but now you have like this weapon and it's like cinematic and everything. I think that unbalance there can be more or less related to the heavy action on Resident Evil 4 when you compare it to the OG's ones. I don't know if I'm making myself like, I don't know if you can understand that fluctuation. That's just
I think
me.
that you're referring to it's about like it's more heavily influenced to
action.
That the action oriented part than say like the more psychological aspect that begs like the Silent Hill aspect of it.
I think this other question, I think this is Joel Castro, I think, because I don't recall Ishimura 2004. So this one wasn't TikTok. He says, congrats on your first episode in English. I'm excited about where this could take your work. What will you say it's your favorite Autopsia episode, Capita, that maybe you will consider bringing with Joe in English?
You know the answer to this. It's like a little bit too obvious. Actually I have two, to be fair. The Silent Hill 2, like it's.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I kind of like hate myself for saying it, but it sounds repetitive. But I love that thing so much that I'll be more than happy and willing to like.
Yeah, maybe, I think we should.
I don't know. I'm gonna think of it as like remastering. So maybe revisit the same thing and maybe like take a different take or different angles. I mean, I will be more than happy to do that. And also like the discussion we had on Terrifier.
Terrifier was good.
I love that. That
it's actually one of the most watched episodes. You know that, right? That's one of the most watched episodes of Autopsia.
I had a blast doing that one because I think it left it has a lot of, I'm gonna say, historic influence attached to it because of all the influence that we discussed on that episode, and it will be great. Like maybe that's something that we can revisit it, or maybe just like hold on until like the fourth one comes out,
bro.
Which I'm really dying to watch.
Do you know how many views the Silent Hill 2 episode has on Facebook?
How many did he have?
It's like 125,000 views or something like that. It's crazy.
That's the one we're revisiting.
it's great. Yeah, the Silent Hill 2 one was crazy in Facebook. So, guys, now I'm going to ask something to the audience. What's the mechanic that scared you the most and why? Leave that in the comments. What's the mechanic of a video game that scared you the most and why? So, let's recap. We're getting to that final stretch. Let's recap. So, the fear comes from, if we put all of these points that we touched, and we didn't even dig deep into the hallmarks of we didn't talk about the puzzles, we didn't talk about all that, because if not, we're not going to finish, but that's something that we can discuss in another episode. But the fear comes from all of these things coming together, and I like to call those systems, right? So it comes from those systems and not just from the aesthetics. And I think we have that very clear. because I think one of the most terror influence and the greedy look and everything, and actually the game design on Resident Evil 4 is so good that the aesthetics were there to make a perfect, like, super close to the OG Resident Evil, but they flooded it with action, and now it goes completely the other way. So you need to have all of these things in place, right?
Element.
With that said, next episode, we're gonna dive deep. We're gonna dissect how trauma is translated into the enemy design. And we're gonna be talking from anything between Pyramid Head and the Maw in the medium, which I think we're gonna be talking about the medium a lot during that episode, because I think the medium is a very, very often overlooked game. So, guys, thanks for your time. Thanks for watching La Autopsia. Join the Patreon. The link on the Patreon is down below. It gives you access to our Discord. You can come in and chat with us in there.
Subscribe.
Subscribe if you haven't. Just subscribe. And then there's a link down there, the beacons with all the social media, so you can follow us. Leave a review. Leave a comment. Share. Until the next time, guys. Thanks for watching.